I have started recording. So I want to welcome Sarah Wells Akita from our wonderful partner Eldergrow, who has provided and helps maintain and educate about gardening and our wonderful garden cart on wheels. We're so pleased to have you here and to have this program for now, as well as recorded on the TV. Hello, viewers of the future. So I'm gonna actually mute myself and turn it over to Sarah, and then I'll keep an eye out for any latecomers and that kind of thing.
Wonderful. So thank you for the warm welcome to Alan and Beatrice and all the other members at Hearthstone. I also want to give a shout out to Jason Timblin, who I have a close working relationship with, who isn't here with us today, but Jason's great and I really appreciate working with him. I would also like to just give a shout out to Chris Smith, who is the educator and has been providing maintenance on your garden there at Hearthstone over the course of this socially distanced time. Unfortunately, Chris couldn't be here with us today, but I hope that she will be able to join us in the future. She's a wonderful in-person resource that your community has. And I also am here to be a resource and a support to you. So today it's a little bit, excuse me, today's a little bit more free format, and we've come on today to have a little bit of Q&A. But before we kind of dive into any particular poignant or relevant questions that you might have for me about your own gardening experience, about plants in general, or as Alan mentioned, what might be relevant for residents that live at Hearthstone, might be talking a little bit about container gardening, since you may have access to a balcony or a smaller space rather than a larger outdoor garden. A great place to begin to talk about that is just bringing your attention to what's already present inside of your community, which is your therapeutic horticultural garden on wheels. And that is provided through a grant through Leading Age Washington, as well as through Eldergrow and our partnership. And we love the garden there at your community. You may have seen it, it's on wheels. I'll be happy to show some photos of it in a moment. And the garden really meets the wellness goals outlined by the Therapeutic Horticultural Association of America. And that is able to provide wellness goals such as meeting sensory stimulation, interacting with all five senses. There's beautiful things to look at. There's beautiful things to smell. It stimulates storytelling and cognition and being able to reminisce about wonderful memories and times in the past. Perhaps that smell of rosemary reminds you of cooking a Thanksgiving turkey, or the smell of lavender might be something that soothes you as you go to bed at night, or perhaps you like the blossoms and the blooms that provide pollen to bees and hummingbirds and other pollinators that grow our food. Additionally speaking, there's lots of textures, fun things to look at, different levels of plants. And we always try to keep the plants in your garden fresh and changing and new. And we love hearing from our communities just about the interesting and interactive ways that you're choosing to interact with the garden at this time. And so we're really grateful to be there, and we're really grateful to be here today. And I'm just going to share briefly a couple of screens that I have here for you. Are you able to see my screen? Wonderful. Let me just make it a little bit bigger for you here. Excuse the delay. Okay. So here's a lovely photograph of some of our residents that we serve with Eldergrow. And right here, they're doing a lesson with pruning and propagation and planting their actual garden. So today, when we dive a little bit deeper into the ins and outs of container gardening, this is a great slide that I like to pull in, just because it shows the varied ways of things that can not only be planted inside the Eldergrow garden, but inside of your gardens on your decks or your balconies, or the things that you might be having in your space there at Hearthstone. This is an example of a beautiful Eldergrow garden in full bloom. You can see some of the projects that we do in our classes that are hanging there in the back. There's some air plants. There's some lovely bundles that birds can take away pieces from if they're hung outside, as well as some stained glass that's utilizing pressed flowers from inside of the garden. And as you can see, there's a beautiful array of plants. So you have that overflowing maidenhair fern there in the front. There's a variety of leaf textures and beautiful colors in addition to blooms. And so we always try to keep our elder grow garden having multiple colors. We like to have 4 colors in addition to green when at all possible. And sometimes during not the spring and the summer, it might be hard to get those blooming plants. But the nice thing is your garden lives indoors. And so it has a growing climate that's different than the growing climate that's outside, which we'll talk about shortly when we get into a little bit more about container gardening in Seattle. So just some benefits so you all know for your community. Why therapeutic horticulture? So therapeutic horticulture has been scientifically proven to meet these goals, to improve your mood, to reduce depression, improving motor skills. You can see there on the right hand side, that's a resident from one of our senior living communities. And the watering can that we provide is really wonderful to work on dexterity. It's lightweight, it's really targeted. So it really gets to the roots of those plants. So we're really getting to the roots that need to be watered and not overwatering the top foliage. It improves memory. So something really interesting about gardening and nature in general is that, you know, when you are out in nature, anything can happen. There's really no limit to the things that you're going to interact with on a day-to-day basis. And this includes and carries over into something like gardening indoors. The University of Washington, and we love this study, the University of Washington a handful of years ago did a really wonderful and intensive study that, and one of the conclusions that came out of that was that indoor gardening, not only outdoor gardening, but indoor gardening not only had the potential to improve memory, but it reduced risk factors for dementia for up to 36%. Now that's incredible. All of us, no matter our status or age, are all looking to keep our mind sharp in the ways that we can and improve our wellness and our health as we age through life. And so improving memory and creating new neural pathways is something that you experience as a result of interacting with plants, with blossoms, with all of the challenges that could come up in keeping a garden. Even things like pests are really helpful to be like, oh, wow, how do I troubleshoot and resolve this problem? Gardening can promote socialization. So whether it's your residents and your staff talking with one another, whether it's using the garden either on your balcony or inside of your community to socialize around with other residents, or if you have guests or visitors coming, it's a wonderful tool to promote socialization, and it improves self-esteem. It helps you to grow your purpose. It really gives you autonomy, and you know, you have a role to do. You're like, oh man, I'm really in charge of watering that garden and making sure that things stay healthy. Like, I'm going to take ownership over this particular plant. One of my favorite things to do, and it might seem silly with residents, but it's a lot of fun, is sometimes folks, in addition to, if you look at your garden, it has a little plant tag and it identifies what the name of each plant is. So whether it's a coleus or a rosemary, but sometimes the residents like to give the plants fun names in addition to what their actual plant name is. So for example, I planted a pineapple mint at a community back a couple of months ago, and one of the residents asked if she could name the plant My Ideal Vacation. And so I thought that was really nice. Perhaps it reminded her of being on a beach in Hawaii, or just having a nice cool beverage that she could have with her in the summertime. So, you know, opportunities for interaction, socialization, having fun, ideas, and taking ownership of your garden. So in a moment, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. One thing I did want to show you before I kind of move out of this screen, and then we'll get into best care for your plants. So one thing I wanted to show you, this is a slide. This is a photograph of me and my contact information. So my role at ElderGrow is that I am the ElderGrow program administrator. So I'm your point of contact for all the Leading Age Washington communities, and I manage our educators around Washington State. So I'm available to assist you, to support you, to answer questions that you have in the garden, to make sure things are running smoothly at your communities. And the reason I like to share this photograph of myself was because I was really proud when I was holding up that plant. Now, it was not a perfect plant. As you can tell, if you look at the bottom, it had some yellowing leaves, and there were definitely some holes in those nice big leaves from pests. But that was the first Brussels sprout crop that I had ever grown myself. And I grew it for last Thanksgiving and harvested it shortly before then with my partner. And I was just really, really proud. I grew them in containers, and it was the first time I had ever grown Brussels sprouts in my life. And if I'm being honest, I didn't even know how Brussels sprouts grew before that. I had only seen them separated from the stalk or occasionally on the stalk in the grocery store. I had never had the experience of growing them, certainly from a seed, but into a fully maturing plant. And then I was able to harvest the Brussels sprouts and serve them to my family as part of my Thanksgiving dinner. So I was really, really proud of that. And that was something simple. That was something I grew in like a 3 or 4 gallon pot, plastic pot in my backyard, with very little previous experience on growing Brussels sprouts specifically. So I will definitely be growing those again this year. So a couple things I want to get into really quickly. I'll show you just a few last slides, and then I'd love to open it up to any questions or answers. And I have a lot of information on tips and tricks to support your own container gardens there at your community or just in your life. I personally grow quite a bit of vegetables and herbs for myself at home. I have a lot of indoor house plants, and I like to grow flowers as well, both as companion plants for my plants like tomatoes, for example. That may be a plant that might be vulnerable to getting pest infestations. I like to plant little marigolds by the base of all of my tomatoes. It really helps to offset that pest problem. And so I grow an assortment of flowers, and I really like to mix it up. I like to always have something new to harvest, whether that's herbs that I put maybe sometimes into a bouquet. Maybe I don't use them to cook dinner. Mint grows very abundantly in the Seattle area, so much so that it's like a weed. It just goes crazy. So I love putting a mint sprig inside of a vase in my house, with some flowers, some fresh cut flowers, whether those are ones that I grew or seasonal wildflowers that are growing in my yard or that I might see down the street. It's really nice to just keep that variety going, and also to mix it up between things that you might plant that are annuals and perennials. And most of us might be familiar with what that is, but I feel like the wording can be a little tricky. So I like to explain it. So annuals, to me, in my mind, I think of annuals as like, oh, they come back every year. That's not what an annual is. An annual is a plant that lives out its entire life cycle in just 1 year's time. So there's only one season for that annual. Now, it could possibly, if you let it go to seed, as we say, where it usually develops flowers, and those flowers leave seeds that may reseed into the ground and create new plants next year, it is possible for your annual plants to come back after the first year. However, the plants that come back year after year that you can depend on, keep in the same container, those are called perennial plants, and perennial plants will flourish for a number of years. So really basic best practices for adding new plants. When you're adding a new plant, you want to dig a hole in the soil only as deep as the root ball of the plant. So if you're buying a plant start, let's say at a nursery, you'll get it into and usually it's like a little plastic pot. It's very small, and you'll want to transplant that relatively quickly because the roots are basically they fit in that container, and the soil is just a very small amount of soil. So it will dry out very quickly, which can risk the life of your plant. So a nice way that we do this, and we do this in person with Elder Grow, is you kind of give that plant a nice squeeze so you can loosen the root ball and turn it on its side. And you should be able to squeeze the plant container right off and see the roots in the base. And perhaps next month when we do this presentation again and are interacting, I can bring some plants onto the video that we can do together and look at the difference in the root balls of various plants. So you'll want to dig a little hole for that. You're going to place the plant in its new home, and then just gently pack the dirt back around that root ball. And you don't want to cover any of the foliage on the actual plant. Tomato might be a little bit different, and we'll talk about that in a moment when we kind of get into more specific plants for your areas and things you might be able to grow on your balcony. And you want to just be gentle with it. And especially when you've just transplanted a new plant, you want to really make sure that you're watering it thoroughly. You want to check it every single day. A great way to do that, especially in a container, I like to put my finger in the soil up to like between my first and second knuckle. If you can put your finger into the dirt and that's dry, it definitely needs water. So The smaller the container, and the difference in container, which we'll get to in a moment, usually the more water it will need, and the larger the container has a tendency to hold the moisture in better. Just for your own maintenance practices, this is for your elder grow garden as well as your containers. You really want to till and rake the soil. So if you look down in that little bucket, there is a tool there. It looks like a big fork, and those live with your elder grow garden too. So you have those tools on site. Tilling and raking the soil, it increases the oxygen. It allows the nutrients to recirculate back into the soil, and it helps the soil to not get compacted. We'll talk a little bit more about soil with your containers here in a moment, but you want to ensure that you're using, when your containers, you're using potting soil. You don't want to just go outside and take the dirt from the ground. The reason is because potting soil has been treated with things that promote aeration. So it allows space for your roots to grow. It allows moisture to be retained. Some potting soils have fertilizer in them already. My recommendation is usually not to buy the ones that have fertilizer in them already, because your plants will need different levels of fertilization depending on what it is. So I find that it's better to actually fertilize the plants yourself to get the benefits of those microbes. However, you're welcome to use the soil that's available to you and works best for you. And then especially when growing things like vegetables, herbs, or edible flowers, anything that you might be ingesting, we always recommend that you use OMRI, certified potting soil. And what that stands for is Organic Materials Review Institute. And so it means that that soil is appropriate for growing organic food. And we want to make sure that we're always putting the most healthy thing into our bodies when we're ingesting the food that we grow. And just these are best plant care practices, both for your elder grow garden, which you'll see a resident here performing maintenance on the elder grow garden, but this works for your container gardens as well. So deadheading flowers, that can mean a couple things. When your flower buds, if you're leaving them in your container and you're not harvesting them to put in a vase or to put in a little glass and have in your room, you want to make sure when the flower head is at the end of its life cycle that you're pulling or cutting that flower head off. That allows all of the plant energy to be refocused and go towards the remaining blooms that have yet to bloom. So it doesn't have to put out the energy to a flower that's already expired. You want to definitely clear away any leaf matter that's fallen inside of your containers or inside the elder grow garden. That's really to help alleviate things like pests. Pests love to eat dead leaf matter, and if there's dead leaf matter around, they will find a way there to get to their buffet, for lack of a better term. So to keep the health of your plants, we want to clear away leaf matter. And if there's any questions about pests and best care practices on that, we can talk about that. Again, cultivating and aerating the soil. You can use your tilling tool. You could use your hands to do that. Watering daily, especially at the beginning of the plant. And we could talk more about water requirements here. And then just a reminder, and this is specifically about the elder grow garden, but we want to make sure that if any new plants are going into the elder grow garden, that they're ones that either your educator have brought or that someone at your community, whether it's Alan or Jason or Beatrice, just runs it by myself or someone at Elder Grow. And the reason for that is that we really make sure that anything that goes into your garden is non-toxic and that it will not cause a reaction with the skin. Also, some plants, they start out young and tender and beautiful, and then they mature into a plant that maybe has thorns or something. So we wouldn't want any plants that go into the garden to pose a risk to anyone in your community. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to the group here. And I'm curious, that was kind of a lot of information and just a general overview. I'm curious if anyone has any follow-up questions on anything that I've shared so far. And Chris, I'm gonna take you off of mute, I think, in case you have a question about anything. Oh, it looks like I have to ask Chris to unmute. Maybe Chris muted themselves, or maybe Alan has to do that.
I just got the request to unmute and I clicked it. So maybe Chris, you can unmute yourself, Chris, if you'd like.
And Chris, if you're unclear what the unmute is, it's the little microphone. It should be in the lower left corner and it has a line through it. It's red in color.
Well, while we're waiting, I just want to say thank you, Sarah. I learned a lot.
Yes. This is a wonderful, and this is going to be a wonderful little program to put on Channel 370. Like, and once people catch wind of it, they're going to be excited about Elder Grow. And it's going to, you know, I didn't learn about Elder Grow myself until I was here for a few months, and I met with, I think it was you, or maybe it was Chris. I don't remember which. But it was you and Jason and Beatrice, and it was great. I just was astonished at how beautiful the card is and the variety of plants we have, how nice it smells. It's just, talk about therapeutic, the way you talked about it in the slideshow. It really does wonders for the mind, body, and spirit.
Yes, yes, indeed. And you know, one thing that maybe your residents know, or that you probably know from our conversation, is, you know, back before we've had the challenges that we've had over this last year, part of our, you know, full service is that we have an educator. They come into your building twice a month and they teach interactive classes. And, you know, sometimes Elder Grow is looked at as like a garden club, but it's so much more than that, you know, because the curriculum that we provide is not only just based around plants, like it's centered around plants because that's the center of what it is that we do, but there's something in it for everyone. So you might have someone that's a retired scientist, you know, you might have someone that's really into the arts. And so there's creative pieces, there's pieces that are really heady and very cognitive. And, you know, we're always open to learning more together and growing more together. And that's something that I love about gardening and plants, is that it's a learning curve. You know, I can't tell you how many times I go into a community and someone's like, I have a black thumb, I'm going to kill all the plants. And I'm like, you know, that's okay. It's a learning curve for all of us. And, you know, sometimes the plants don't make it, you know, that's part of life, right? Not every seed grows into a tree, right? And not every plant is even meant to survive past a season. And so it's all part of the learning, and it's all lots of fun. And there's always something that we can learn about ourselves through the process, as well as navigate solutions together, which is really fun. And so, yeah, well, I'm grateful to be here today and be able to provide some alternative programming as we kind of navigate what things look like as things change and gradually things open back up. I know there at Hearthstone, you have an exciting event coming up next Friday, so that's really fun. And we're grateful to be able to, like, you know, have the garden as a backdrop of that event too, because it's a fun gathering space in addition to just being a beautiful, sensory stimulating environment within your community itself.
Right, and people have been coming to our weekly Elder Grow kind of petting zoo program that we've been doing, and they've been taking clippings back for their patios. And it's been a pretty busy program. So this next program is going to be a lot of fun. I think it's we're going to have refreshments, souvenirs, all kinds of good stuff. So
oh, fun. That's exciting.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna try to personally be there myself in person too. So that would be really fun.
We'd love to toast you.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Okay, I'm curious how we should pivot. Should we open things up for questions, or should I talk a little bit about container gardening? How would you like me to proceed?
It's up to you, really. If you want to do a little container, I'm happy to keep recording it. I mean, the knowledge you've shared so far has been extremely valuable. I've learned stuff for myself. So I would be happy to hear about container, especially since I installed 4 new containers, big ones at my house this year. So I'm definitely going to be, I'll be doing my filing while I'm listening extra close to what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm curious, just so I can also be relevant to your questions, Alan. So in these containers that you installed at your home, oh, I have another person that just entered the waiting room. Looks
Yep,
like
I'll let him in.
Awesome. So these, the containers that you have had at your home, what sort of things, have you planted anything in them yet?
Well, the first year we built one out of cedar. It was like 6 feet or 8 feet by 4 feet, something like that. And we grew tomatoes and potatoes and other things that didn't do so well with tomatoes and potatoes. And the potatoes are still in there. I'm just wondering, is it worth growing potatoes? Because I did, like tomatoes and zucchini, especially, you can taste the difference with organic homegrown.
Yes.
Potatoes, I was kind of like, they're very similar to the organic potatoes that I bought and made into potato starts. But this year we're adding garlic. We had a friend that gave us some organic garlic that we have big garlic scape that we're going to use. Oh, we're excited. We're excited about all the stuff that we're adding.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that you make a really good point. Part of what you're saying that's jogging my memory about things like, especially like container garden, where you're relegated to a smaller space, is you really want to make sure that whatever you're planting is a companion plant for the other. That means that one will not toxify the soil for another one's roots, or one won't compete for space, energy, time, etc., with the other plants in your garden. So for example, your potatoes may have taken up some of the root structure of the tomatoes, which require a lot of space, a lot of area to spread out. And as you mentioned, something I noticed with my own growing is the tomatoes and the zucchini, especially, you can taste the difference. Absolutely, 100%. There's nothing like eating a warm homegrown tomato right off of the vine. I love just snacking on mine while I'm picking the rest. And picking them frequently helps them to continue to keep growing and maturing. And the zucchini, I was really surprised by. I like zucchini in a general way, but I think it's a relatively plain tasting vegetable. But there was a significant difference in the ones that I grew myself. Not to mention, they produce beautiful flowers, which in and of themselves are edible. You can saute or fry a zucchini flower, and it is absolutely delicious. And it helps the pollinators. Anything that helps the pollinators is good in my book. And for those of you that may have access to either an outdoor garden or a balcony space where you might have beautiful blossoms and blooms, the hummingbirds are going crazy right now. And I love nothing more than looking out my windows and seeing hummingbirds and butterflies and big fuzzy bees doing their thing to keep the world moving.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Wonderful. So I guess I'll give a few kind of tips on container gardening for your residents or anyone that might be watching this live.
That would be wonderful.
Or
Yeah.
watching later too. Believe me,
Yeah,
this is
or
going to be
watching
valuable
later.
going forward.
For sure. For sure. So, I know that Jason's been doing an awesome job with the events there and giving folks generously some awesome clippings from the Elder Grow Garden. So, a wonderful thing to kind of note is, again, if you get a plant from the Elder Grow Garden, and let's say that we've put it into a small cup of water for you, a couple of things. One, you want to wait until that plant starts producing. They're usually white in color, little roots that come out, right? That tells you that the plant is going to be able to thrive and make it and have what it needs to be able to breathe in the soil. Some plants are very hardy, and some plants you could just immediately put into a cup of soil and they would be fine, or maybe they would die back a little bit and then they would come forward and really mature. But the best way to kind of make sure that they're going to survive is to let those roots grow. And that might take a week or two, and it might mean that you need to change that water out like once, just to keep it fresh and keep it pest free. So waiting for the roots is a really great one. If you're planting things into a container, something to really be mindful of is that you don't want to overplant it. So you want to do a little bit of research on how much space that plant that you're putting into that container needs to survive, right? So first of all, the root structure on something like a tomato, you need a pretty significant container size to plant tomatoes effectively. Now, my upstairs neighbor grew some tomatoes a couple years ago in a tall bucket. The bucket itself was maybe about 3 feet tall. It came up to about my waist and probably about 12 inches across. Usually for a container, you don't want to plant in a container that's less than 12 inches across. That's usually a good rule to kind of follow if you'd like a plant to thrive. The other part of that is you need to understand that a plant is only going to spread its roots as far as it can in the container. So a smaller container will make it so that less root hairs can grow, and it will limit the ability of the plant to mature. So it could make for smaller plant, smaller yield, or it could put the plant at risk for survival depending on the circumstance. The other part you want to learn is make sure to use potting soil. Again, potting soil contains elements to really promote that aeration in the soil, to make it so the soil doesn't compact. If any of you are, gardeners at your home in like something like a garden bed that's not in a container or just gardening in the ground, one thing that you usually need to do in a home garden in the ground versus a container garden is you need to amend the soil. So normally you need to rake through the soil, aerate the soil, pull out old roots, maybe add compost or fertilizer to make the garden really healthy and welcoming to new plants. In a container garden, it's nice because a lot of times you don't have to do that. And the potting soil is modified to help with things like moisture retention, or so that the plants are not getting too much moisture. One potting soil that we use at Elder Grow that I really like contains coconut coir, and it's the exterior part of the coconut, and that allows for there to just be some moisture retention inside of the soil itself. So that's really great. And if any of your residents or folks at your community would like soil recommendations, we can definitely recommend some in your area. I know Swanson's is a local nursery that a lot of folks get plants from. And they have a variety that's called Edna's that we really like. It's a local business and they make really great potting soil. And I like to buy from them. The other thing about container gardening, especially if you're growing herbs, flowers that you're going to eat, or food you're going to eat, you want to make sure that the container is food grade quality. That's specifically for plastic pots, right? You want to make sure that the plastic pot is BPA free and that it's relevant for growing food. And if you get your pots wherever you get them, if you get them at Swanson's, if you get them at Home Depot, you can always ask the folks in your local plant nursery if the pots are relevant for growing food. And if you grow food in something like a 5-gallon bucket, you want to make sure that it has holes on the bottom to be able to drain. That's really, really important because otherwise the bucket will just fill with water and it can really drown the roots of your plants. For growing purposes in Seattle, Seattle is in growing zone 8B, 8B like boy. And the hardiness zones are based on what the average coldest temperature is during the year. And so we're in 8B. So what that means is there are certain plants that do really well in Seattle, and there are certain plants that don't. For example, when I lived in San Francisco Bay Area for 10 years, I had a wonderful succulent garden, lots of succulents, beautiful succulents of all varieties. Unfortunately, when I moved to Seattle, a lot of those succulents died because the moisture content, here is just too high. San Francisco is a foggy place. It's a marine Mediterranean climate, and Seattle just has too much moisture year round and also not enough sun and dryness to maintain something like a succulent, but does really great for a variety of other vegetables and herbs. So, some easy things to grow short season are like lettuces and arugula. Those are wonderful. You can consistently harvest them. Something like a lettuce, you could just go out every couple of days and cut off at the base, the outer leaves, and it helps the inner leaves to keep growing. And you can just have fresh salads every single day. I love growing herbs. My herbs go crazy in my garden and my pots at home. So inside of my home, just on my windowsills, I have a big pot of mint. I have rosemary, lavender, and some sage. And then if my plants get too big, I might move them into either a larger container outside or into my garden bed. So herbs do really, really well. And then things that have a longer season, like tomatoes and peppers. A little while back, you might remember that we were talking about tomato roots, and I said, oh, there's a difference with tomatoes. So something that I learned about tomatoes, which is really cool, is that the wider their root system is, the more space they have for their roots, the better that they will grow. However, a really cool piece about tomatoes is, let's say you get a tomato in a pot and you get it at the store and it's this tall, and it's the tomato start, and you squeeze the root ball out. Something that you can do is you can leave it completely horizontal on its side like this overnight. You will just leave it completely on its side, and overnight the tomato plant will actually bend so that the top of the plant turns 90 degrees upwards and starts reaching for the sun. So now the base of the tomato plant, the roots are at a horizontal level and the plant itself has reached for the sun. So what that allows is any place that a leaf will have shot out of that tomato plant, it can now create a root if you bury that in the ground. So it allows for a much more extensive root system, which makes for much better tomatoes. Couple other pieces on tomatoes, because I know folks love to grow them. Once your tomato starts producing flowers, you can do a couple of things. If it's really, really early in your tomato harvesting season, you can just pull those flowers off, which would allow the energy to be recirculated to create larger and juicier tomatoes down the road. So you might have to wait a little bit longer for your reward, but your reward might be tastier than it would be had you let the initial flowers grow. And then the other piece with tomatoes is you want to make sure that once the flowers are producing, if there are leaves that are below those flowers, you can cut those leaves right off. And that's because the leaves provide a shade cover for the tomatoes, but they don't need to be underneath. Again, that would be the plant circulating energy to a space that's not needed. And another important thing about not only tomatoes, but a lot of plants in general in containers is you want to make sure that you're watering the roots and not watering the foliage when at all possible. That can really cause things like mildew or a powdery fungus on the exterior of your plants, which cannot always kill them, but can sometimes make it so your plants can't get the oxygen that they need. But also you can use a spray bottle to like mist your plants, and that's fine. You just don't want to deeply water the actual leaves and foliage of your plants. The other thing I would say is, again, just like have fun with whatever garden that you're doing. Mix it up, have fun things that you can always harvest. You know, I love having just like fresh herbs in a container at my house so that I can smell, even if I'm not using them all the time for cooking. It's a really lovely thing to just be able to smell, use in a bouquet. And then also think about like what you can use in addition to using those plants in the kitchen. So maybe, you know, for lavender, you can put lavender in cookies. You could use lavender as a rub on a poultry breast before you cook it. You can also use lavender flowers to create a little sachet for your drawers or a nice eye pillow to help you relax before going to sleep at night. An edible flower that I love to grow in my garden is called calendula. It's an orange flower, has beautiful petals, and those petals can be harvested and dried and made into a wonderful salve that really works nicely on the hands and the skin. So that's something that I love to do. And then something I learned recently that I didn't know about is that geranium leaves, the beautiful blooming flower geranium that are all over the place right now, you can actually chop the leaves and use them in sweet recipes. You can infuse the leaves into water for a nice, like lovely facial toner, and you can actually steep it to make tea. So that was a new kind of piece that I learned recently. Any questions about any of those pieces?
Actually, I would love to have you elaborate on the companion plants. You were
Yeah.
mentioning, of course, the marigolds are good to plant with tomatoes. Do you mind elaborating on the actual Eldergrow cart itself? Are certain plants better suited to be together, planted next to each other?
That's a great question. So, you know, the interesting thing about the Eldergrow cart is a lot of the plants that are present in the Eldergrow cart wouldn't grow great in Seattle. You know, you'll notice that a lot of the plants that are present are tropical plants. And you all are lucky at Hearthstone because Chris Smith, who's your educator, is actually a tropical plants expert. That's her area of expertise. So she knows a lot about tropical plants. So in regards to specifically the Eldergrow garden cart, there's less companion planting in the sense that, you know, when I think of companion planting, I think primarily of growing food. And the Eldergrow garden carts, for the most part, are not growing food, although growing things like lettuce is totally possible and herbs. But when we talk about plants and different needs, which is also in the same kind of vein of companion planting, we are strategic in the Eldergrow garden cart about where we place certain plants. For example, in the image that I showed earlier, there was a really beautiful, lush and lively maidenhair fern that was towards the front of the garden. The maidenhair ferns, while they can get really big and take over the garden, we like them for a few reasons. One, they can kind of trellis down the front, making a really beautiful plant display, but also they're a plant that requires a significant amount of water. And what we found over the time with Eldergrow is that not in all communities, but in most communities, the gardens are pushed up against a wall, which means that the plants that are in the back of the garden have a tendency to get watered less than the plants that are in the front. So things like the maidenhair fern, we like to place strategically towards the front, whereas things like the fuchsia and the coleus that tend to grow really big and tall, they make nice like back corner plants and also can be a bit more drought tolerant than some of the other plants. We also like to keep those herbs up front so that they have that really nice interactive, sensory, fragrant experience for folks when they're visiting the garden. But Beatrice, I love the interest in companion plants, and perhaps when we're talking about future discussions and events, companion planting could definitely be a much larger and longer discussion.
I personally would love that.
Yeah.
Thanks for elaborating.
For sure, for sure.
Also, I didn't catch the name of that compost brand that you said has the coconut core. What did you say that was called? Edna?
Edna's Organic is a local soil that I recommend. You could definitely get that at Swanson's for sure, or any place, usually like Home Depot, any of the ones. We always try to recommend, like, supporting the local businesses when possible. And
Absolutely.
also just like, Edna's is made locally in Seattle.
Do you mind spelling it? Because I don't think I know how you're saying it.
EDN, like Nancy, Edna, like
Oh,
a
good.
woman's name.
Perfect. Okay, I actually did get it, but then I doubted myself there.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange word, especially over Zoom. It might be a strange word with all the consonants.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I want to add that we all get free bags of Edna's for saying it every single time we say it. We get a free bag. Which is
Oh, that would
pretty
be
cool.
nice.
Tell them we're doing some advertising at Hearthstone for them.
Yeah. I mean, we're about nonprofits and small businesses here, so it's not a bad thing being a nonprofit ourselves.
For sure.
Jason,
Does
do you
anybody?
want to- Oh, I'm so sorry, Alan. I
No,
wanted
no,
to ask
no,
Jason
I'm-
if he knows if we're using the Edna soil or not.
No,
Hearthstone. We're
no.
not
Mm-mm.
We're
We're using a compost that was Elder Grow approved, and it is organic. It's edible. I just don't remember what it was.
Edna doesn't sound like the one you.
Yeah, and Edna's is different, Beatrice, than the one that has the coconut core. I can get you the name of that one. That one's in like a bright green bag, and that's the one that we normally use when we plant our elder grow garden. So it's possible that that's the soil that's at your location too. That's the one with the coconut core that we utilize when we're planting the garden itself. I like to buy Edna's when I'm like refreshing the soil, mixing in new nutrients and that kind of thing, covering the exposed root balls. But I find the ones that contains the coconut core is a lot better when we're initially planting the gardens, just for the moisture content.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Sorry, Alan, I cut you off earlier.
No, I just I was wondering if there were any other questions or any other thoughts going on here. This has been really enlightening and wonderful. I can't wait to put it on our TV channel. Honestly, I think people are going to be dazzled by the amount and quality of information and applicability too. I mean, I see containers on our residents' balconies. So I think this is going to be sort of the corny term. I think it's going to be like an evergreen in usefulness for people.
Puns are really easy in this line of business. They're very, very easy to keep that going.
I get in the weeds with them.
I like your sense of humor, Alan. I've only had the pleasure to talk and meet with you a couple times, but I for sure.
I'm blessed with very humorful men in my office.
That's awesome. That's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. Yeah, I guess the only other thing I'd say about containers is, I've only had the wonderful experience of being able to come to your community, I think one time so far. And I did also notice the assortment of pots and containers out on folks' balconies. And the one other thing that I think I didn't really mention that I definitely wanted to kind of touch on is that you have options when you're purchasing pots to create for your garden. And there are benefits to both, but I did just want to speak to both of those things briefly. So like, two things that we would recommend that are, low cost, budget friendly, and also good choices for either like plastic pots or clay pots. And I'll just list a couple things that are the benefit of each one just for your community and yourselves to kind of have in your back pocket. So plastic pots, they're the least expensive, they're budget friendly. They tend to hold moisture longer than clay or ceramic pots. They're pretty lightweight and they're easy to move. The one thing about plastic pots is, depending on the level of sunlight that something like your balcony is getting, Something like a black plastic pot can tendency to heat up very quickly, which makes it so that you might have to water more frequently or that your soil might dry out. So it's important to just keep that in mind. If you get something like direct sun a lot of the days, just be cognizant of the fact that that might require more water, or you can alleviate that by buying something like white or lighter color plastic pots, or just ones that aren't fully black. And again, you want to make sure that those plastic pots have drainage holes in the bottom. Otherwise, you don't want your roots to drown. The benefit of clay pots, I really like the way that clay pots look myself personally. Something that a lot of folks become concerned with clay pots is clay pots will have a tendency to develop like a white mildew on the outside of the pot. It's actually not harmful to the plant, but it can be not beautiful to look at. So something I do with my clay pots is when they develop a lot of white mildew, I just place them under the sink and wipe it down with a sponge. You can also use white vinegar on a sponge, and that tends for the mildew to not grow back as quickly because it will soak into the surface as well as the surface itself being porous. That's something I like about clay pots too, is it allows the roots to breathe. You do need to monitor those in hot weather because they do tend to dry out pretty quickly. It lets the air in to breathe, but also it allows the air in to dry out the soil more quickly than something like a plastic pot. Again, they're relatively inexpensive. They come in lots of shapes and sizes. And the one thing, especially for your folks that might be utilizing clay pots on their balconies, windowsills, etc., is you want to make sure that you purchase the little saucer that goes with it. It's just looks like a flat ceramic plate underneath it. And that allows that to catch any excess moisture. It keeps the moisture off of your deck, off of your windowsills, or especially like wooden surfaces that might be prone to rot. Yeah, it's just a little bit about containers. Any questions on that?
I wanted to ask, the plastic, is there an easy way to tell whether it's safe, food grade, BPA free, whatever it's called?
That's a good question. A lot of things that are BPA free say BPA free on the pot itself. You might look on the bottom where there's like a recycling symbol. That might be a good place to look. Or as I mentioned before, like plant people for the most part tend to be a happy and helpful brood. And so if you're at the store and you're in the plant section, it might be that a plant might not be safe for food grade, but you can always ask your local plant person there as well too.
Thank you.
Another tip on that, if you're buying plant starts, a lot of times they come in these little pots. They're plastic, they're quite flimsy. In most recycling programs throughout the United States, those plants, unfortunately, those pots are not recyclable. And so a lot of times they either get thrown into the recycling and then not recycled, either because they're dirty or the recycling system in the area does not recycle those goods. But one thing that you can always do if you're environmentally conscious is you can always bring those pots back to places like Lowe's, Home Depot, Flower World, Swanson's, etc. And the plant nursery will reuse those pots. So that's always something to think about too.
That is a great idea.
Yeah.
We actually have an upcoming program about recycling.
Awesome.
So
That's great.
Alan will have to add that tidbit from Sarah.
I will. The challenge is going to be for me to remember it.
I'll remind you.
Well, if you have those little flimsy planter pots, you can always also rinse them out and go put them on the bottom shelf of the Eldergrow garden. There's a recessed shelf that's there on the bottom. And, for things like Jason's monthly event where they're doing some plant start giveaways, it's really helpful to have a little container there that we might be able to just plant your plant into for you as well too. So it's another good way to reuse.
Great idea, Sarah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, and then the most fun thing, I think, easy for container gardening is it's easy to water, right? So hopefully everybody has access to water in their rooms or units or whatever area you're living in. You can fill up old plastic water bottles and just, water the plants at the base. It's an easy way to do it. You can just go back and forth into your kitchen and spend some time with your plants, making sure that they have the moisture.
If it's too watered, I have the option that they can mist it too, if it's too
Yes.
watered.
Yes,
Just
great
so that
point, Jason.
Somebody's doing something, because that's a problem that I've ran into before, was it being too deluged, and
Yes.
it was just, some of the plants started dying, and bugs, these little white bugs showed up when it gets too wet because they incubate in that wet soil. So
Yeah, that's true. Jason made a really great point. So like, again, I think we mentioned this earlier in the call, but maybe before Jason got on. So if you ever need to test that, you can go in the Elder Grow garden or your containers on your porch. And I would put your finger into the soil up to the second knuckle. So not right below the nail, but the second one. And if it's dry up to that point, then it's okay to water. And if you feel moisture on that point, you don't want to water it. Not every plant needs to be watered every single day. It's important to monitor that like at the beginning of planting a new plant, but once they get started, they're pretty good. But misting is always a nice treat for plants. They tend to like that.
Well, we will know who has been gardening when we look at their knuckles.
Yeah, all the dirt under the fingernails, I end up with that a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Ooh.
Well, we'll have to get real dirty next week on the
Next
28th.
Yeah.
Yes, that's going to be so much fun.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks for being there, Sarah. That'll be
Yeah,
really
seriously,
nice.
this has been wonderful, and I like I said, I can't wait to share this with people from the future on the channel 370, our internal TV channel, and then yeah, I'm going to stop recording now because I think we've asked all the questions and gotten all the answers. So I'm going to say goodbye and thank you so much to Elder Grow, our partner.
Yeah, thank
But
you
we'll
so
stay
much.
on for a moment longer here.